Aliens exist and President Trump knows about it. That's according to Israel's former space security chief. In an interview with an Israeli newspaper, he said the aliens have been waiting until today for humanity to develop and reach a stage where we will understand in general what space and spaceships are. NBC News chief global correspondent Bill Neely explains this one.
Hi, Alison. Well, this is quite a story, and it comes from the man who headed Israel's space security program for nearly 30 years. Haim Eshed is making the extraordinary claim that the United States and Israel have been in contact with a group of aliens for years, not immigrants, but extraterrestrials. He has called them the Galactic Federation of Aliens, and he says President Trump is aware of the existence of these aliens and had been on the verge of revealing their secrets, he claims, but was asked not to do so by the Federation in order to prevent what he calls mass hysteria. Well, the retired general says the US and Israel have kept it from the public because, quotes, humanity isn't ready and the aliens don't want to reveal themselves until humanity can evolve, he says, and understand what space really is. Well, the good news is that he claims an agreement has been reached between the US government and the aliens, a contract to do experiments here. There's also, he says, a secret underground base on Mars where there are American and alien representatives. Now, this former head of a branch of Israel's defense ministry is 87. He was very well respected, at least until now. And he said all this in an interview with an Israeli newspaper in Hebrew, but it's really taken off after parts of it were published in English by the Jerusalem Post today. He says he's come forward now in the hope that his news will be accepted as true. He notes that if he'd made these claims 5 years ago, he would have been hospitalized, but now he says, I've got nothing to lose. Well, so far, President Trump has not tweeted about this, though remember a year ago, he did set up the Space Force as the fifth branch of the US Armed Forces. Well, we did ask the White House, the Department of Defense and Israeli officials to comment. So far, they have not responded to the NBC News request, and I wonder if they ever will. Alison.
President-elect Joe Biden formally introducing his team of health experts today and announcing a three-part plan to fight the coronavirus in his first 100 days in office.
It's not a secret how to do it. Masking, vaccinations, opening schools. These are the three key goals for my first 100 days.
NBC News correspondent Mike Memoli joining me now from Wilmington, Delaware. Mike, what else did Joe Biden say about his 100-day plan to fight COVID?
Well, Alison, we tuned in to the Biden event today expecting a personnel announcement, and we got something of a surprising policy discussion in terms of Biden setting these very clear goals for his first 100 days. We know he's been reading a lot about FDR, really leaning in to setting some benchmarks for him. And you touched on it there, these three key goals he's setting. First, we've talked so much about masking. He wants to make sure that the country is masking up. He says as a patriotic act, he's going to try to mandate that where he can on federal property, but lean on the states and local governments to try to impose some new mandates as well. Talked about the idea of getting states the help that they need, especially as it relates to this issue of getting vaccines. He wants 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days. And then, of course, lastly, this idea of making sure students can get back into the classrooms. Now, I think it was interesting that he was leaning into this idea of the first 100 days and also the tone he was setting. Take a listen to how he presented, I think, a pretty clear-eyed assessment of what's ahead for him.
My first 100 days won't end the COVID-19 virus. I can't promise that. But we did not get into this mess quickly. We're not going to get out of it quickly. It's going to take some time. But I'm absolutely convinced that in 100 days we can change the course of the disease and change life in America for the better.
You can't separate that sort of tone from the president-elect from what you were just talking to Monica about in terms of what we saw at the White House today. You know, Biden trying to sort of offer, as Kamala Harris put it today, the idea that help is on the way, but also to really, you know, underscore the fact that Americans can't expect this to change overnight, that there's a pretty big hole that's been dug for him, and he's only just starting to try to dig out of it, Alison.
Mike, Joe Biden also stressed this pandemic will not be over in his first 100 days, but he said his health team will make fighting COVID a real priority. This team has extensive experience. Could you tell us a bit more about them and what they will bring to this administration as it tries to fight this pandemic?
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting things that Biden pointed out is that a lot of the members of the team he announced today have already been advising him, some cases in this campaign. In the case of Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, who's been part of his pandemic advisory board, not just for the transition, but throughout the campaign. The same for Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith, who's going to be in a role of this COVID equity board that they're establishing to try to focus on the disproportionate impact on Black and brown communities. So they've been working with him, but they have been in a lot of cases working with each other. Dr. Fauci, who's of course going to be staying on in his current role, but with an expanded portfolio, knows very well Rochelle Walensky, who's an infectious disease expert. You heard her today discussing her life's work focused on HIV and AIDS, something that Dr. Fauci worked with and focused on in the 80s. That earned him the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work on that issue. And so this is a team that has already worked closely with each other. Biden is going to be expecting them to continue that kind of collaboration. And also emphasizing, Allison, something that's been a real hallmark of Biden, both him saying this today and the team saying it, that they expect to tell him the truth and not, again, do what the implied suggestion there is Trump's team has been doing and some of the officials under Trump have been doing, which is trying to cater their advice, their guidance in a political way. That's really a key part of what Biden has said is going to be his approach to dealing with the pandemic.
Mike, you've been saying that these announcements, these picks have been coming fast and furious. We have some news into NBC News that I'd like to share with you. It's from our colleagues Jeff Bennett and Kristen Welker. They are saying that President-elect Joe Biden has selected MARCIA FUDGE to lead the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That's according to two sources familiar with the situation. If confirmed, we know she would be the first Black woman to lead the department. Your take on that news today?
So what's so interesting about this is we heard from Congressman Jim Clyburn, of course, a significant voice in Biden's ear on all things, including nominations. And we were tipped off that this might be a possibility because we know that the Congressional Black Caucus has been pushing for greater representation for African Americans in Biden's cabinet, but specifically they've been campaigning for MARCIA FUDGE to serve as Agriculture Secretary. And so I think there's some disappointment on the part of the CBC, of FUDGE and those close to her, that this is the position that they've gotten, but this is the position that she's going to accept. Obviously, a cabinet position is hard to turn down, and so this position of housing and urban development has traditionally one that goes to African Americans in multiple administrations in the past. They didn't like the idea of being pigeonholed in this role, but we know that Biden is under pressure to increasingly diversify his cabinet, and this is a step in that direction we expect to potentially be announced by the end of the week.
All right, another question for you about picks that are upcoming. Alabama Senator Doug Jones, reportedly Joe Biden's top pick for Attorney General. Mike, why does the Biden team think that Jones could be a strong pick here?
So what we're hearing about the fact that Jones has now emerged as at least if not the leading contender for this position is a lot to do with what we're hearing for a number of these other positions as well. It has to do with personal relationships and his own experience as well. Doug Jones has known Joe Biden for more than 40 years. He was actually a law student when a young senator from Delaware came to Alabama to speak at his law school. Jones introduced Biden for that event. A few years later, Jones was a staffer for the Senate Judiciary Committee. Biden, of course, a member of that, and it really helped build that relationship that has continued ever since. Now, as of somebody who, of course, we've been talking about this issue of diversity, Jones is obviously white, but he brings significant credibility on issues of justice and his experience as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama in the 1990s. He made the decision to prosecute two KKK members for the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. That was not an easy decision to make in that position, but he was successful in that prosecution. And so we have heard from some civil rights group that Jones is somebody who would be acceptable to them in this position. But we know that there are some other names as well in the mix.
Mike Memoli, thank you so much. I got to share a compliment to you. It came from our senior producer who referred to you as the Biden Encyclopedia. She was really into your knowledge about the relationship between Jones and Biden. And I just thought that is such a great way to describe Mike Memley. So I want our viewers to hear it, too. Mike Memley, the Biden Encyclopedia.
Random baseball statistics and political trivia along with Biden trivia. That's what I bring to the table, Allison. Thanks.
What an amazing combination. Mike Memley, I am here for it. Thank you.